we have been studying the Old Testament book of the Song of Songs written by King Solomon. And in this book, we have been learning about marital relationship and a romantic relationship between a boy and a girl. Now, in this presentation, we will answer three main questions, or we will try to explain three main questions. Firstly, is this a plot of three people or two people? Because some scholars say this romance is a plot between three people. So a king, a shepherd boy and a girl. But as we dig in deep and study this book, we learn that this is a plot of only two people. This is a plot, an intriguing plot involving just two people, a boy and a girl. Now we know who the boy is. He was a king as well as a shepherd boy. Now, the second question is, this boy in this intriguing story, who is the king as well as the shepherd, why does he talk like a king as well as a shepherd? Now, in the social ladder of Israel, at the top were kings and right at the bottom were shepherds. So, be it Solomon or David or Moses, they are combining the social ladder of Israel to bridge the gap between the top and the bottom. Now, the third question is, who is this girl? Who is this girl? Now, on the slopes of Mount Hermon, Solomon had a beautiful country estate, and after kinging, he used to go and do some shepherding. Now, next to his farm was a tenant farmer who had sons and two daughters. Out of those two daughters, one daughter was a grown-up girl. Now, the tenant farmer died and the estate or the vineyard was divided into two. Some of the vineyard was divided for the boys and some of the vineyard was divided and given to this girl or this sister. Now, after this tenant farmer died and the farm passed on to his children, the sons and this daughter, grown-up girl, her life became one long drudgery. Why? Now, ever since the parents divided the vineyard, these sons made her do a lot of work. And so she had to take care of their vineyard as well as her vineyard. And as a result, her own vineyard was neglected. Now, there is something else that happened, that she had to stay a slave for her brothers for the rest of her life. Now, she was out in the sun taking care of her brothers' vineyards too. And so her skin went darker and darker in the sun. Now, in the Middle East, they used to keep a bride out of the sun for 12 months before a wedding to keep her skin pale and nice. And that is exactly what they did to Queen Esther. So because her skin was getting darker and darker, her prospects of marriage receded day by day, because the rest of her life she thought she will be slaving for her brothers. Now one fine day, as she was working out in the fields, she meets this young man, chats up with him, likes him, and they like each other, and they arrange to meet day after day, the next day and the next day and the next day. And within a fortnight, they are deeply in love with each other, and they are saying all the silly things with each other, what young lovers say to themselves. Now the only thing that troubles her about this young man who she has met a fortnight ago is that she doesn't know who he is, where he comes from, where he rests his sheep during the day, and so on. And this young man keeps evading the questions that she asks, and he will not tell her who he is. He is hiding his true identity from her. Anyway, they are deeply in love with each other. And finally, he says, "Will you marry me?" Now, this is what she wanted for years. And so she gladly says, "Yes, I will marry you." But he says, "I have some bad news for you." He says, "I have to leave tomorrow because I live and work in a big city. And so while I'm away, I'm gone, you get ready for the wedding. And when I come back, we can get married." So the next few months, she is all excited and she's getting ready, and it's exciting, and she begins to get ready. But as she's getting ready for the wedding, as days go by, she begins to have nightmares. And all her nightmares are centered around one thing, and that is she feels, "I have lost him, and now I am looking for him." One night she dreams that she's running throughout the streets, and she asks the watchman as to where he is. And she's running around and asking, "Have you seen the one I'm looking for?" And finally she finds him, gets a hold of him, drags him into her mother's bedroom and hugs him tight and says, "I will never let you go," only to find out as she wakes up that she's hugging her pillow tight. Another time she dreams and has a nightmare where she was at the door and he was putting his hand through the door, trying to lift the latch up of the door, but the door is bolted further down. So it's a feeling of being paralyzed and she cannot move. And the hand just suddenly disappears. And she runs to the door and she opens it just to find that he is gone. So what's the explanation for these dreams? She's afraid he will not come back to marry her. And so she's beginning to think it was only a holiday flirtation, that he won't keep his promise. But one day, when she's out in the fields as always working, and there is a great cloud of dust out on the road, and horses and chariots are coming down, and she asks, "Who is that coming?" And her brothers say, "It's the king, it's the landlord who's coming." And as he comes closer and as she sees him, she discovers it's the young man. It is her young man in the chariot riding with the horses. And she is shocked to realize that she is the 61st woman in his life. Now, she has to leave the country farm and go live in a palace. And so the day of wedding has come, they get married and there is a banquet. And she's sitting at the top table next to the king, and all these 60 beautiful fair-skinned queens around her. She says, "Stop staring at me." She says, "I know my skin is dark, looking after my brother's vineyards. I can't help it." And so there is an inferiority complex, constantly comparing herself with the other queens. So if only Solomon had waited for one Miss Right, then this would not have happened. When a woman feels insecure, she starts to compare herself with others. And she says, "You love others more than you love me," and so on. So the whole thing is not God's will for Solomon and his country girl. So if only he had waited, he would have had that one queen, and which was God's will for him. So he had a bad example from his dad and others in his royal household in that time and era. Now, they are married. She looks at her king, and she says, "Solomon, now that we are married, can't we just go back to the countryside, lie on the grass side by side and live in your estate up there?" But he says, "No." He says, "I am king and you have to be the king, and you have got to reign with me here." So finally, she says, "Look at all these beautiful women around me," but with a tone of inferiority. She says, "I am just a rose of Sharon. I am a lily of the valley." Now, when we hear these flowers, the lily and the Sharon, we think these are beautiful flowers. But when we go to Israel and have a look, they are tiny little flowers and we cannot pick them. And so the most beautiful flower in Israel is the lily, white, and it soars up. And he says, "Like a lily among thorns is my darling among the maidens." That so comforts her that she sings a little song to cheer herself up. And the song is, "He brought me to his banqueting table, and his banner over me is love." So she has come to terms with the fact that she has fallen in love with a king. But as we explain this intriguing story and who this girl really is, we clearly understand what was God's will for Solomon and the country girl, and what is God's will for every man and every woman, that he wants them to be one husband and one wife for the rest of their life. When we come back, we will look at more of the Song of Songs in the Bible and what is the message through this intriguing romance for us. Amen.